Hey guys, welcome back. So, when I first started learning how to cook professionally, I went to culinary school. And one of the very first things that you learn how to cook when you're in school is eggs. Eggs has always been used as sort of a way to judge a chef's ability to kind of just understand basic technique. And cooking is really all about technique. And that's what you guys are here for. So, today I wanted to show you a dish that is steeped in Americana, something that is, I guess you'd say, uniquely ours, though it has an interesting backstory, and something that everybody kind of universally seems to love, and that is the Denver omelet, or Western omelet, depending on where you're from. So, in front of us, we have the ingredients. Let's go through them really quick here. I have 4 large eggs. I have shredded cheese. In this case, I have Colby Jack, but you could use cheddar or Monterey Jack would be fine. I have butter. I have a red bell pepper. You could use any color bell pepper. I have scallions, and then I have cooked ham. So the first thing we need to do here is prep our ingredients. All right, so we have all of our ingredients diced up, and you'll notice one thing in particular, which is that they're all roughly the same size. That's a really important step here. And the reason is that when you go to eat this thing, we kind of don't want one thing to be in a huge chunk and another thing to be in like this tiny little dice. And so trying to keep it the same is important. And at the end of the day, you're sort of dictated by whatever the smallest ingredient is. And in this case, it's the scallions. They're not very big, obviously. And so we've just cut everything else to match that size. You'll also notice that they're in basically equal proportions. And that's another part that makes a Western omelet or a Denver omelet what it is that the 3 main ingredients, the onion, the pepper, and the ham, are all roughly in the same proportion. So let's start by cooking our vegetables. A lot of times I watch people make this dish, and they're really making something that looks a little bit more like a scramble, where they're mixing everything together in the pan, and that's not exactly the way that it was intended to be. Now, the way I like to start this, and the way I like to start all of my eggs, is in butter. For me, that's really kind of the only fat that I ever choose to use. Now, an argument can be made for bacon grease. Look, I grew up in the South, and I love an egg fried in bacon grease, but what I want to show you today is a much more traditional and sort of classic technique for how to prepare it, and it involves quite a bit of butter for a number of reasons. One, it tastes delicious, but also the butter itself, that high fat, helps to make the eggs much more tender. We'll talk about that in a minute. So first up, I have my pan. And in fact, I actually have 2 pans. I have a nonstick pan for when we go to make the omelet itself. And then I have a traditional sort of stainless steel pan. So I'm going to take some butter. I have these cut into 1 tablespoon chunks, by the way. And I'm just going to put this on my heat and allow this to start to melt. The first step for us is going to be cooking the peppers and the scallions together and allowing those to soften up. Raw peppers are not delicious, in my opinion. I think they're really tannic, kind of bitter, if you will, and I don't love their flavor. And so I like to soften that flavor up while still retaining some texture. These things are cut rather small, so it's not going to take a long time for that to become very, very tender, but it does take more than 0 time. And certainly, in my opinion, it takes more time than if we were just adding it into our pan and allowing it to cook while the eggs were cooking. So I think this 2-step method produces a much better end result. The other benefit too is that if you do it this way, you sort of have your filling done, meaning that you can make as many omelets as you want, one after another, and they can be really, really consistent. Maybe that's not important for you, but if you're cooking for your family and not just yourself, it's kind of an added bonus. So once our butter starts to melt, and by the way, I should add, this is salted butter. It's one of the few times that I actually cook in salted butter, but I was always taught that you don't season eggs. That's a very traditional way of seeing it. People, the thought process goes that everybody likes their eggs different, and so you let them season. What I found is that if you deliver completely unseasoned eggs to the table of a guest who's paying money in your restaurant, they usually aren't very impressed. So my workaround is that salted butter provides just enough seasoning that all the flavors come out, but it isn't so aggressively seasoned that someone feels like it's too much. They can add a little bit more salt if they want to. So let's add our red peppers in here. And let's go ahead and add our green onions. And this is the bottom part. So the green onion, as the name implies, green on top, white on the bottom. The white part is really the only part that benefits from having any amount of time cooking. The green is, well, it's more like a traditional herb, and it should be added at the very, very end. And so we have those separate, and we'll put those in much later in the process. So just give these a quick toss, and obviously they'll become aromatic almost instantaneously. You can start smelling that pepper and onion aroma right out of the gate. Now, I'm not trying to get any color on this, and so you'll notice that I'm managing my fire, and I'm cooking this over medium-low probably, and we're not really ever going to get above that through the entire process. There's always an argument as to whether or not eggs are better with some color on them, or whether they're better to be nice and blonde. I definitely come from the school of thought that if you're doing a scramble or an omelet, you want to keep them pretty blonde. If you're doing a fried egg, sometimes it is fun to get a little bit of that kind of crunchy exterior. And certainly, if you're doing some dishes like in the canon of other cuisines, like Vietnamese-style omelets or egg foo young, those always have a deep caramelization to them, but that's not this dish. This is one that's definitely much more in the vein of a classic French omelet with a couple of changes to it. So, the minute I get that aroma, this has been cooking for maybe a minute here, give or take, we're going to go ahead and add our ham, and then we're going to turn off the heat, because the ham is already fully cooked. This is another mistake that I see all the time. People throw in the ham and they let it brown up, and that sounds nice on the outside, but fully cooked ham is exactly that, fully cooked. And if you keep cooking that, all you really do is dry it out. It doesn't actually gain that much more flavor. On the other hand, if you allow it to warm up, then the natural flavors do, in fact, increase, because our palate is much more receptive to things that are warm as opposed to things that are ice cold. So adding it in here and allowing the residual heat of the peppers and onions to just truly warm it up and allow those juices to kind of come back to the surface, that's the way we end up with the most flavor from this. And so this is the filling. As simple as that, and we can set it aside. We're just going to kind of push it off to the side here while we work on the eggs, and we'll add it in a very particular phase during the cooking to kind of get the most bang for our buck. So, let's move on to the eggs. So our filling is done, and it's just sort of chilling out on the back of the stove here waiting for us. It's still obviously very, very warm, and that's what we want. So let's start cooking our eggs. Now, I'm using a non-stick pan. Reason? I think it makes better eggs. At the end of the day, that's really all it comes down to. I think that you end up with a much, much better color and texture with a non-stick pan. Now, I know there are a lot of folks out there who have concerns over the health issues related to cooking in non-stick. My understanding of that is that from a chemical standpoint, cooking over very high heat with nonstick pans is not a good idea. But we're never cooking eggs over very high heat. We're cooking them over very, very modest heat. And so I personally don't have an issue with it. I've never seen any sort of degradation of the coating of my nonstick pans because I only use them for low heat cooking. So let's go ahead and get this thing turned on. So turning our burner on and then working it down to somewhere in that medium-low area is what we're looking for. Because again, we don't want color on this. We want it to be really, well, what we call blonde. You know, really nice, just the color of the eggs themselves. So let's go in with our butter. And this is where it gets a little bit on the indulgent side here. We have 2 tablespoons of butter added to this. And I mentioned this already, but the butter does a couple of things. Aside from tasting delicious and seasoning it, it actually emulsifies into the omelet itself, and it creates a much more tender egg. And the reason for that is that it disrupts some of that protein structure that's inside the egg white, blends in with the egg yolk, and adjusts that ratio of fat to protein, which produces something with less chewiness, becomes a lot softer. So it's just inevitably a better texture for something like an omelet, which should be, by the way, very, very tender. That's what you're going for here. Now, this isn't a traditional French omelet, which is a very different technique, and maybe I'll show you guys that at a different point. This is definitely an American style or diner omelet, if you want to call that, meaning that it's just folded in half. It also means that it has a tendency to be something that is a little bit more aggressively filled than the classic French omelet, which usually has very, very little filling, sometimes no filling whatsoever. So once my butter is melted, but it does not have any color to it, it's just melted and foamy, I'm going to add my eggs. So I have 4 eggs here, and you guys notice they were kind of different colors and sizes. These are eggs from my friend's backyard from his chickens, and they're delicious, so I like to use them. Now, I'm just whisking this with a fork, by the way, not a whisk, so we're not overworking these, and we're going to add them all in one shot here. Again, this is 4 eggs that we're using. It makes a pretty big omelet. To me, again, I think that's sort of part of the American omelet experience, is that it is rather big, but also it's dictated by the size of my pan. This is a 10-inch nonstick pan. If I used a smaller 8-inch nonstick omelet pan, I'd probably only be able to do this with 2, 3 eggs tops. So this is our technique. Using a rubber spatula, we're moving around the outside, and we're pushing the curd into the center. And you guys can see this curd. It develops rather quickly. But we're not breaking the curds up. That's one of the major differences between the American style omelet and the French omelet, is that in a French omelet, we might be working this with a whisk, in fact, or a fork in here, and we would be trying to get very, very, very small curds. But that is not the technique for an American. So as we move this curd around, we kind of have to lift up the omelet sometimes and let that extra sort of uncooked egg sneak underneath it, and that's what we're doing here. Again, over around, and then as it starts to form, that's when we really want to make sure that we're pushing it into the middle, and that we're also using our rubber spatula, take it off the heat sometimes, this is easier, to spread the uncooked egg all the way around to the outsides of this, so that we don't have any spots that are just absolutely filled with uncooked egg. I don't know if you guys can hear the helicopter going over my house, but that's an added sound bonus for this video this morning. So once we're at this point, and let me show it to you here, by the way. So this is our curd. You can see nice big ripples in here, big, big, big pieces. Pushed down all the way around the outside. Now we're going to move on to adding our next ingredient, which is going to be our cheese to this. So we're going to take our cheese, and this we sprinkle over the entirety of the omelet, not just in the middle of it, over the entire thing here. And my heat is still on, but again, I'm down pretty low. In fact, I just turned it to low, so it is very, very low. Make sure that cheese is nice and evenly spread around here. And then we're going to take our filling and we're going to spoon that, but we're only going to do it on 1/2 of the omelet. So I do it on the half that's closest to me. That's just a matter of like the fact that I'm right-handed, and it makes it easier for me. There's no right or wrong answer to this. But fill that really nicely. If I can, I'm going to use all of this, and I think I can. All right, that looks really good. Very, very filled omelet, but that's exactly what we anticipated. And then our last step here is going to be to pop a lid on this, but just for a few seconds, not for a very long time. So nice tight fitting lid over low heat. And here's the idea behind this. I know there's going to be somebody come in and say, Kevin, omelets are supposed to be creamy on the inside, and they are, and it will still be creamy on the inside. But one of the distinguishing characteristics to the American style omelet is that it isn't as soft and runny as a French style omelet. It's a bit more set. That's just one of the kind of marquee differences between the two. And I find that if you want to keep that nice blonde color and not let this get brown, the only way for you to get that interior perfect is to pop a lid on it for 35, 45 seconds at tops. It'll help melt some of that cheese. Obviously, the warm filling will help that as well, but we'll get just a little bit more set than we would be otherwise, which for me produces the perfect result. So let me grab a plate out of my pantry. I'm going to come back, pull the lid off this, and we'll be ready to serve. Okay, so we have our plate. We can pull our lid off. You see we have just a little bit of condensation under here. That's what we'd expect. If it was really steamy, we probably would have overdone it. And now we're going to add our tops of our green onions. And so just sprinkle those inside, and they can kind of go all over the entire thing. That's fine. These are absolutely delicious, but they don't need to really be warmed up more than just sort of the ambient temperature of the egg. So the easiest way to get this thing out is to kind of use the pan to flip it onto your plate. That's a lot easier than trying to use a spatula. So just grab your pan and kind of give it a shake, and it should sort of move around a little bit. If it absolutely goes flying around the pan, that tends to mean that you got it really, really done on the bottom. And actually, before I take it on my plate, let me mention that. If you like your omelet to be toasty brown on the outside, go nuts. It's yours, obviously. This is for you, so do it however you want. I would suggest that you do that in the end stages of cooking, though. it doesn't benefit from that high heat in the early part. If you want that toasty color, once you pop that lid on to set it, just leave the heat up a little higher and you'll get a nice golden brown color. So let's get it out to our plate. Now I give it a little shake just to make it easier for me. Kind of shake it to the edge of my pan. And then I use my plate. And so this is hidden a little bit by the camera. I apologize, but that's the only way we can do it. I sort of take it onto my plate, shake it down, and then fold it over itself. Like that. And now you can kind of use your rubber spatula to give it a nice shape on the plate. And that is our American style Western omelet. Nice and just sort of pale yellow color on the outside, no browning, filled with cheese and ham, onions and peppers. It's a classic for a reason. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Come back and see me again soon. We'll make something else. Take care.